The sound of the automatic door locks on a Cadillac was the loudest sound in the world to a girl like me. It usually meant that things were going to get crazy, and that is exactly what was going to happen on that foggy night in 1979, driving through Honey Swamp. You know, we bury whores like you in Honey Swamp all the time, said Flop. And then suddenly, I felt a hard slap, and my head bounced against the window next to me. And then his usual triad began. How the hell did you only make $4,000 in 10 days? What am I going to do with this? How hard is it to make $500 a night like I asked you? As he threw the stack of $100 bills at me. We pull over to the side of the road, and he began beating my head against the window. And then he pulled me by the hair out of the driver's side and dragged me through the woods to the water. He pushed my head in the muddy water until I was grasping for breath. Suddenly, his whole demeanor changed, and he got real sweet. Why do you make Daddy do this to you? You know what I expect. We have an empire to build, and I want you by my side. Now come on, let's go get a room and get you cleaned up. And it was over, just like that. You know, I have a passion for helping women. I just do. I came from a rough background. My family was chaos. My father was an outlaw biker. My mother was a psychic. There was a lot of abuse going on in my home, and it just made for a really mixed up little girl. You know, my life changed drastically at the age of 7 years old. When one of my father's motorcycle gang members was left to babysit me and my little sister often. And he began to experiment and to teach me things that little girls shouldn't know. Um, and I would be forever changed. I would not be a little girl anymore because he tried to make a 7-year old into a woman.
So you said at 7, everything changed. You were considered a woman. What happened?
From that point, I began acting out a lot. You know, some people, when something like that happens to them, they turn inward and they're traumatized in a way that they don't want to be touched or, you know, have any type of relationship with anybody. For me, it turned me outward, and I became sexually active at age 10, which really made me prey to any man that wanted to mess around with little girls.
You were already outcast at that point.
Exactly, exactly.
Understandable. So, so at age 10, how did that affect? I mean, were you still in school? How did it affect your relationship with your mom or your dad? Well, how was your regular everyday life?
You know, I went to Catholic schools because I got my mother, my grandmother was a Catholic, and she thought that the only way to save our soul was to send us to Catholic schools.
Yeah.
But the thing was, is my dad would drive up to the Catholic school and pick me up on his Harley Davidson with his motorcycle colors on, and then I'd get home, and my mom was giving a psychic reading to somebody, and she would be so sweet. And then when the person would leave, she would be so mean. I could not really understand how she could flip her personality at that time. I felt like she was two different people,
Okay.
and that traumatized me for really for life.
So did you figure that that was a foundation for you? How did this become, or should I say, how were you were vulnerable at that point? So you were definitely a product of your environment. Where did it turn?
You know, at that point, I ran away from home twice. I ran away first when I was 12, and I was put in a children's home, St. Elizabeth's Children's Home in New Orleans. And for a while, it was a very stable place. We went to schools, Catholic schools around the city. I rode the streetcar to school every day. The house was run by nuns. Um, it was stable, but the trauma that I had experienced was not getting addressed. And when you have unaddressed trauma, it comes out in all kinds of ways.
And what was the way that it came out to get you into what you know now?
You know, I ended up running away to the French Quarter. I was in New Orleans, and the French Quarter of Bourbon Street was nearby. And it didn't take me long to hook up with somebody. I
Tell me the
was
scenario. Well, how did it work? Like, did you meet him at the bar? Did you meet him just out having fun? What was going on?
You
How did you
know,
meet him?
I was walking down Bourbon Street and I looked to the right and there was a line of Harley Davidson motorcycles. And
You're
I'm
already
like,
drawn to that because of your dad,
right,
correct?
because of my dad, and that's really the only lifestyle I knew because of my dad. So I rolled up in the bar. Nobody asked me for an ID. There was this guy with long hair and a long beard. His name was Mickey. And he said, he kind of opened the conversation. And by that night, I was living at his house because I didn't have any place to live. And I told him I was 17, and everybody believed I was 17 at that time when I was 14.
Really?
Because I was.
So where was you staying?
I was staying at his house. I just became his old lady.
Well, before then.
Before then, there was a place called crazy though. There was a place called the Slave Quarters in New Orleans.
Really?
It was the old, and what it was actually, it was the old slave quarters in the French Quarter, and they made this into encampments. The building was like falling down, and so there was this whole population of teenage runaways that would live in this old building.
So that's where you were living, and you met Mickey.
Yes.
What was your first job, should I say? What was your
Well,
everyday
the first thing that Mickey did was get me a fake ID and get me on stage on Bourbon Street, and I became a stripper at age 14.
So what really made you want to do it? Was he like demanding as far as this is what you have to do, or did you truly have an interest in it? Like, where did you agree to say, yep,
I wanted to
do
please him. I wanted the mindset of a trafficker, and what he does and his role is to convince you that whatever he's asking you to do and whatever he's suggesting is for your good. And he had me convinced that we were going to make all this money and build a lifetime together and travel the country on motorcycles, and he just painted this really pretty picture.
So the picture that he painted, was it romantic on your end for you being so young? In your mind, was it romantic, or were you considered an employee at that
No,
moment?
it was a romantic relationship. It was a romantic relationship. We slept in the same bed together. But what would happen is he would go on trips a lot with his biker friends. The biker group would go out on a trip. But he would leave me in the French Quarter. And I would go to work. But a lot of times I didn't go to work, and I'd go off to different parts of the French Quarter, and I loved to party. I'd go to the gay section because I knew he wouldn't come over there.
So this was actually still around maybe 14, 15 maybe at the time
Right,
now?
right. Yeah, around 1978, 79.
So around 78, at that moment you were about 14, 15. Did you have any contact with your parents? Did they come looking for you? Like, where are you? What was going on back home at that
You
moment?
know, actually, what was going on back home is that my mother had convinced my father that she didn't want to be responsible if I did something to hurt somebody. So they had me emancipated, and they cut ties with me. So they weren't legally responsible for anything that I did. So to me, I was a woman. I was
You
an
were grown.
adult. I
You
was
was
grown.
grown, and you were living with him.
And that's really what the picture was about. But of course, he began checking my money. Like, I'd give him all the money, like, to pay our household bills. I didn't really realize what the act was. I just, like, wanted to please him. So, but then it started, like, why did you only make this much money? And
So on average, how much did you make that, like, per night, should I
well,
say?
back then in 78, 79, $100 night was amazing. So we do $150.
So he was scolding you when you made anything less than that. So that's where it didn't feel romantic. When did it not feel romantic anymore? When did it become like, why are you not making this amount of money? When did you see that change? I
I
want to know
began
about.
to get fear. I began
Yeah.
to get fear because the abuse started. And Mickey, because he would call me a child. He would abuse me with a belt, and that was his way of controlling me. But like I said, he went out of town a lot. And one day, while he was out of town, I walked in this bar, and there was these two gentlemen sitting there. in three-piece suits with brims on, and there was a pistol sitting on the table, and I was in love. I was like, wow, I got to get to know these dudes. And I did get to know them.
So they were starting to be more romantic, and you kind of forgot about that situation because
yes,
he was gone anyway, and you didn't. You were detached.
and I left. So I left with the man, and we went on this 3-day journey around South Louisiana to all these little bar rooms, and he'd go play cards, and there was some drugs involved, and
That you
drinking
partake
that I
in?
was partaking in.
Yeah.
He was kept feeding me cocaine. And about the third day, we pulled up to a bar, his bar, right outside of Baton Rouge, and we went in the bar, and we went in the back room, and there was a room full of makeup travel kits and racks of like short dresses and sexy clothes and all of that. And he told his girl that was behind the bar, turned out to be his wife, and he told her to get me ready to go to the country. So that's what we did. And she packed me up a little suitcase. She measured me to see what size I was. And I was just all excited. I thought that being in this world was what I wanted in life. This everything I wanted in life, that I wanted to be, in some kind of bad boy scenario.
Yeah. Did you feel kind of disrespected in one way when you saw it switch? So the reason why I keep asking, was it a platonic type of relationship, or when did it turn, and when did you kind of notice that it wasn't romantic anymore and this is what I'm supposed to do? Did you feel disrespected at that moment when you noticed that he had a wife and now you're in this
I was
ball now?
confused. I was confused, but I had been on the streets for a while, and I had some street knowledge, and I knew this kind of thing happened. I knew the game. There was some allure there.
Some accountability, and just say it is what it is.
Yeah,
Really?
just the game was, and but what I didn't know was going to happen. As soon as he finished packing me up, we drove to the country, deep in the swamps, probably Mamou, Louisiana, and there was this little bar room sit back off to the side, and there were actually rooms in the back, and so there were several of these bar rooms across Louisiana. It was called the Circuit, and so what happened then is I was left there. He said, you're just gonna have to stay here for 10 days, make us a lot of money, then I'm gonna come pick you up, and you're gonna, and at first I was like, okay, I'm gonna obey, I'm gonna do what's right. But after that, I started drinking because they had clients that would come in, and you start drinking. Well, once I started drinking, I didn't want to be there.
So wait, so let me ask a little bit about the circuit. I really want to know like, I'm confused. So was this like almost like a bed and breakfast?
It was like a brothel.
Okay.
It's like a brothel. And there were several of them across the state. There was one in Abbeville called the Chez Paris. There was one in Opelousas called the Gates. This particular place that he brought me was in LeBeau, Louisiana, outside of Krotz Springs, called the Spot. And when we pulled into this place, it's kind of ironic now, but it was trailers that were pieced together, and the shape of the trailers were in a cross. And I think about that now, and just how ironic how God helped me to get to the other side of this awful life. But this all started with a symbol of God.
So these were high-end clients that visited this place, and
Yes, they were. The oil boom was going on in the South Louisiana then, so they had a lot of people that were working offshore, and they would come into the bars. They would be off for a week, and they'd spend all their money, and then they'd just go back on the boat.
so what kept you motivated to even continue this life? Was it good money? Did you feel that you were serving a purpose? Like what got you up every day and say,
Fear.
you still fear?
Fear, because what happened is that night that I got drunk, I showed my ass as usual when I do when I get drunk, and I was insisting to leave, and then I realized that they weren't letting me go anywhere.
How did they keep you there? What was the circumstance?
They locked me in a room, and they called him, to come and deal with me.
Now, was it a okay living environment? Was it inhabitable? Like, I'm
Oh
trying
yeah,
to
no.
paint a picture of
Well,
what
the
was
picture,
going on.
it was like if you ever seen movies where they feature brothels in Las Vegas outside
Briefly,
Pura,
yes, yeah.
you know, it was like that. There was like a furnished, you know, it was very nicely furnished. It had a lot of improvements there, but there were a lot of bedrooms. I mean, you just go down the hall and there'd be straight bedrooms, and they locked me in one of those rooms.
What was the punishment? What do you think the punishment was? You said he was physically
Well,
abusive.
when he got there, he decided to make a show out of it, and he literally beat me for about 2 hours in front of all the girls, because that's the process of a trafficker, is that they need to break you.
Yeah.
And so, and each time that would happen, the beatings would get worse till I was in fear.
Barbaric.
It is. It's actually the term for that. It's called guerrilla pimping.
It's just guerrilla pimping.
Guerrilla pimping. And so he was a guerrilla pimp.
Breaking. That's the terminology.
Yeah, breaking.
Yeah.
Breaking your spirits, almost like you break our hearts. It's
yeah,
like,
that's what I was comparing it to. That's what I was thinking about.
mm-hmm.
So, what other things that happened during?
You
that?
know,
I mean, did it
during that time, I worked in the brothel I worked on the circuit for about a year. And then he owned a bar room in Homa, and he would bring me in the bar room some weekends to bartend over there. And then he had his own little tricks that he would hook me up with. And we were in a scenario where we lived with his wife and another girl, and we all swapped bedrooms. Like, when it was your night, you slept with him, and it was a big thing. You thought, but he was crazy. And what happened one night is I was always a little chunky, and he would put me on this strict diet. But he also had his son there. His 12-year-old son and his 13-year-old daughter lived in that house too, with those three women. It was insane. So one time I ate, instead of eating the tuna fish that he had put out for me, I ate some ravioli that was in the cabinet for his kids. And he nearly beat me unconscious. So at that point, after I healed up and I was working in the clubs, there was a group of these men. They called themselves characters, and they would run girls from New Orleans to Mississippi. And they were all friends, and it was really like an organized crime type of situation. And so he would just take, as soon as so these men would always be trying to get attention, just like on the streets when a pimp is trying to steal a girl from another girl. This happened in this environment as well. And so
that actually happens.
Yeah, that happens. Yeah. I mean, like in the streets, in street game, when another pimp comes up to you and you're out on the street and you're representing a certain man, and if you look at him, if you actually make eye contact, then he is allowed to break you, which means take your money. So it was really crazy. So yeah, no, really, it was. It's crazy lifestyle. It's so insane.
So, what was the scenario that got you to the next step? So we understand that spot. Mm-hmm. What now? Moving on, progressing through the story. What was that last scenario that changed your life again? How old were you? Where you were?
So what happened is, during that time, I still had a drug addiction, and so I was always sneaking around and getting customers to bring me drugs and sneaking the alcohol. And this one night, he had left me in charge of the bar, and he came back, and I was doing drugs in the back room with somebody, and he went crazy. He almost shot the guy. The guy ran out the door fast enough that he didn't get shot. But then he picked up a pool stick and he beat me. He beat me so badly that I was unconscious. He left me on the side of a 7-Eleven.
In New
badly,
Orleans?
but no, yeah. No, in Homa. He had a bar in Homa.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, in Homa.
Was it cold? Was it nighttime? What was the scenario?
I woke up the next morning, beat up. Nobody found me around that store. I had to get up and walk in that store. And when I did, I asked him to call my father. They didn't call the police. You know, back in those
That's
days,
interesting.
though, culture didn't operate like that. People were trying to protect people from the police. You know, like
Yeah, I can
like
understand that during that time.
yeah,
I
it was.
get it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
during that time, the culture was totally different. So, he called my dad, and he came and got me, and I went into a hospital, and I stayed in that hospital for almost 8 months. I had to have some reconstructive surgery in my cheeks. And then they transferred me to psychiatric portion, and I stayed there, and they did some work with me, um, and tried to heal some of the stuff. But you know, medicine and methodologies are not like they are now back then. Um, and so, but I ended up getting a little better. I went to live with my grandmother because my mom didn't want me there.
I can imagine.
Um, and at my grandmother's house, there was a group of um, Arab students that would live in the apartment complex and go to LSU. And so I got a boyfriend. I got a boyfriend, a cute little Arab guy. um,
So how old were
and
you then
I
now?
was 17.
Okay,
I was
so
17.
so that was from 14 to
17. I was in this
Ooh,
in that
it's
craziness for
pretty
3
rough.
years.
So did he willingly let you out? Like call my
Well,
dad?
at that point, he was scared for his freedom, so he wasn't going to come like looking for me because he had beat me really severely. I should have died at that time.
Got you.
And there were a lot of places in my life that I should have died,
Yeah.
but God kept me alive for this purpose.
Okay, so you were living with your grandmother now, so you got a boyfriend, and how was that relationship? Like, did it finally feel like that's where you were becoming normal?
I thought,
What was going on?
I did. I finally felt like I was going normal. He asked me to marry him. Of course, he asked me to marry him for a green card.
Of course.
You know, but so and I had 2 babies really quickly, 2 beautiful children. His children,
Yeah.
a boy and a girl. But I was so incredibly broken from all the abuse and the trauma that I had experienced that I really couldn't be a mother. I just didn't have it in me. And I really didn't even know what I was supposed to do because I had lived in all these different worlds, and that normal life, I didn't understand it.
Did you know what you wanted to do post being trafficked? Did you know what you wanted to do? Like, did you have a personality at that time? What did you like to do?
I did, and I've always been an outgoing person, and I got a job at Dillard's selling cosmetics, and it was a perfect fit for me.
You enjoyed it.
I enjoyed it, but then I got pregnant right away, so I stayed home with the children. And was really like a dedicated mother in the beginning. I did all these breastfeeding classes and would go to these little children playtimes and
Sounds
try
like
to
a
have
breath
this.
of fresh air. That
Yeah,
was nice. That was nice.
it was
Yeah.
really that way. But my husband was very controlling and dominating. He was from the Middle East, and women had a
Imagine
certain
cultural
role.
difference.
Right, and
Yeah.
I took to that at first really well because that's what I was used to.
More of the
But
dominance.
yeah, more the dominance.
I got
That's
you.
what I was
Yes.
used to.
I understand.
So, but the situation, he became mean. He just really became unruly, and I started doing drugs again. I was sneaking drugs. I went to a rehab a
So
couple
what
of
is it?
times.
What was that timeline like? What did you feel that you were clean and then you started doing
I think
drugs?
we were married for about a year. Was the first time that I had snuck off, and then I had the 2 children, and so that was about the 3rd year. And when my children were, and at that point I was just sneaking around and getting high here and there. But when my children were 2 and 4, I disappeared to New Orleans one night. I went back to Bourbon Street because that's what my trauma knew. It was a comfortable place for me.
You were overwhelmed and you just
I was overwhelmed with being a mom and with all the,
escaped
with his the way he was treating me. I was gaining a lot of weight, because I was miserable.
So at some point you weren't happy. You were just trying your best to adjust, but it just didn't quite stick being a mom. And then because of the trauma, you reverted back to what felt a little bit more comfortable. So
Yeah.
out of those 2 situations, that felt more comfortable.
that felt more comfortable, and I left my beautiful babies behind with him, and I went on to have another probably 20 years of addiction and prostitution and pimps. And I left New Orleans and went to Dallas, and I met this pimp there named Pretty Tony, and he was from Louisiana, Creole guy, and I fell for him.
Yeah, of course, the home roots.
Yeah, home roots. I fell for him. But he was a real life pimp, and he had 6 girls, and he didn't play no games. And I always wanted to, I thought that I could continue to have my cake and eat it too, that I could continue to get high and be in this situation, because for me, the game and a pimp trafficker, being with my trafficker was like being with family. Fred's has been there for quite some time. It was a bar on the river. They have a boat launch there, and the boats go in and out. And there's a lot of swampy areas there. And so I would gravitate towards Fred's for a lot of years. And I didn't really understand what the significance of it until this visit that we just took. And it was familiar. It's like this part of me, this trauma, the part that still has is holding on to this last bit of trauma, um, feels comfortable in a space that reminds her of the brothels that I was in when I was 14. It's like a comfortable place, and it's crazy that that's still comfortable.
Almost subconsciously
Right, almost subconscious.
gravitate to environments like that, not meaning to, but
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So that's really how I'm working through my stuff today, is that I don't visit those places too much anymore. I put boundaries in my life around people, places, and things.
because and I imagine because you moved on.
Right, I moved on,
Time
and
to look on.
my life is great today. I bought my first house at 58 years old. I finally got to pay for my own Lexus and not somebody else's Lexus.
That was a car that you always wanted.
The car I always wanted. Yeah, my business partner gave me $10,000 for a birthday present to put down on the Lexus, and so I got a 21 RX 350, and it's my dream car.
So anything else that you're proud of, should I say? What is something else that you're proud of?
I'm just proud of my children and the relationship and how the relationship's growing.
Something
We're all,
by.
yeah, we're all making strides towards leaving the past behind and working on a new future. I love being a grandma. I have 4 grandchildren, 2 twins in Las Vegas, and a 5-year and 8-year-old little girl here. And I spend a lot of time with my grandchildren. It's really the pinnacle of my life is to be a grandma.
Well, I appreciate you sharing something so traumatic and bringing awareness that it's okay, that you endure whatever it
Yes.
is that you endure, and you have the choice to be better in any way. You have the power immediately to change who you are, and you're a living witness to that. So I
Right,
appreciate you
exactly.
sharing that.
Thank you so much. Thank you for taking the time and asking these amazing questions and getting the story out there. Appreciate it.
So, getting into the Queens Foundation, let's talk about that. What is it doing now? How successful is it? What's happening now?
The Queens came at a time when I really needed another outlet. I had started Ring Lab Media. We were doing well. We started hiring employees, and I was bored. So I needed to. I'm a visionary, and so I needed to create something different. And I saw this issue in our industry, where it was a male dominated leadership, and the women needed to have a place. And so I started off by women networking with one another, creating business opportunities. And then further along, at these business opportunities, we have these little cocktail parties, and we started raising money for human trafficking, because that was in my soul, that to help other women that had went through what I went through. And so I decided to teach them digital marketing, to teach them how to be a media buyer. And then we were awarded some scholarships, and Queens Arise was born. Queens Arrive Scholarships for Survivors is our program where we have a curriculum that runs through all types of digital media and marketing, advertising, and additionally have set up internships with some of the companies in our industry for our girls to move on to.
So, as of today, what are you working on? What's going on now?
Well, it's getting to be the end of the year, and now that we have a 501c, we're our donations are tax deductible, and so we really need to get on. Had to get on board with Giving Tuesday and the end of the year, and so we created a steps challenge. It's called Steps for Survivors: Walk a Mile in Her Shoes.
I like that. That is a nice title. Walk a mile in her shoes. I'm sure that's a long mile for you.
Yeah, it's a long
Yep.
mile for them too, because it's not really just about me anymore. It's about the women that I have a purpose to deal with. I mean, not really deal with. That's not the term I would want. I have a purpose to love on them and show them the way. I heard right before I applied for the 501c. I looked at some data, and that data was talking about the women that left, that exited a trafficking situation. And 2 years later, 75% of those women live in poverty. There's money for boots on the grounds operations. There's money to house trafficking survivors as they exit out of the lifestyle, but there's very little to propel them to economic security. And I wanted to offer that path to these women so that they can have the same life that I enjoy now so abundantly.
Good, good. So, for future references, where do you see the organization going? What are your hopes and aspirations for this? Because I can imagine it can't stop, because that is what actually brought you to a new level. That's what.
The long-term goal, not every woman that exits out of trafficking is going to want to be a media buyer. It's a kind of a very niche area. But I also have relationships with call centers that do remote call centers. And so my long-term goal is to go into shelters and to programs and set up remote jobs for the women so that as they transition out, they'll have a form of income and they'll be able to make better decisions and just have a less bumpy ride to go through establishing themselves and achieving economic security.
So, what can you say to women that are dealing with what you're dealing with? What can you say to them right now?
I can say, never give up. No matter what, if you mess up, if you make a bad decision, if you do the wrong thing, you just get right back up and you keep trying. And you look for people that are like-minded and that have positive attitudes and that want to go someplace. And you educate yourself. You have a lot of growth to do, but there's a place to grow to. And I believe in you women. I believe in everyone that's out there struggling that you're going to make it. Thank you.